Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. President Obama's parallel universe. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. The two most important issues for Americans are the economy and the terror threat posed by Islamic killers. Yet President Obama apparently believes global warming and increased gun checks are the most vital issues. It's kind of hard to fathom, but Mr. Obama is investing a huge amount of energy in climate and guns. Meantime, many American workers can't make enough money to prosper, and the terror threat is off the charts. Last night, the president held a town hall meeting about guns. He was told that gun sale background checks and more stringent registration rules are not going to solve the murder problem.
What would it have solved? Now, knowing
none of the recent mass shootings, I should point out, none of the guns were purchased from an unlicensed dealer.
Correct. And that's what I'm speaking to, the executive action that you mentioned.
Nobody's saying we need to be going soft on criminals. What we do have to make sure of is that we don't make it so easy for them to have access to deadly weapons.
As Talking Point stated earlier this week, criminals and terrorists are not going to buy guns from dealers who do background checks. Of course, the president knows that, but will not acknowledge it. On the climate front, okay, fine, let's all try to get the environment cleaner. But this is not a top 5 issue, and a president shouldn't be spending most of his time trying to find ways to stimulate the economy. Instead, the feds continue to strangle the free marketplace with high taxes, complicated regulations, and mandated Obamacare rules. Although many Americans do live in a world of their own, it's dangerous when the leader of the free world does. On Tuesday, we can expect the president to deliver an upbeat State of the Union address. He always does, even though terrorism and the economic situation are not being addressed in effective ways. It's hard to believe that Mr. Obama thinks crazy people, criminals, and terrorists are going to stop murdering because the FBI is conducting more background checks. While those checks are needed, there's nothing wrong with trying to keep bad people away from guns. Nothing wrong with that. The executive action is not a panacea, a cure for sick violence. There is no cure. So let's acknowledge that and get to work really protecting Americans from criminals and terrorists, not giving the bad guys false hope. And on the economy, come on, Mr. President, programs aren't working. Everybody knows it. Try something else. And that's a memo. Now for the top story tonight, reaction with us here in New York City, Eric Bolling and Geraldo Vera. What say you, Geraldo?
I think that, thank goodness that you're in favor of background checks for gun purchasers.
80% of Americans, according to the polls, 80% have no problem with background checks.
So why all this fuss then about the president bringing it up?
Because the fuss is that the president is not putting the emphasis on the right place. For example, as I said earlier, if you make gun crimes federal crimes with mandated 10-year prison sentences, you really can cut into the bad guys. Every gun crime
I like
is a
that
federal
idea.
crime.
But 400 million guns in the United States of America, at what point is it too much?
You can't do anything about that, because that's the Second Amendment. That's what happened here because of the westward expansion.
Well, I don't want to make your hair stand on it, and I think the Second Amendment, as construed by the federal courts in recent decades, is stupid.
But it doesn't matter what you think.
Is full of baloney.
It doesn't matter what you think, because that's the reality, and that's what we want to deal with here. What say you?
I'm glad it doesn't. Geraldo, Bill's right. It doesn't matter what you think. I also agree with your talking points, Bill. President Obama is working on 2 legacies. It's the climate change issue and the gun issue, because he has to look away, because the real legacy that he should be worried about, the economy, isn't working for him.
292,000 jobs
Sure, the stock market.
292,000 jobs.
Wait. Can we do this? It's the lowest labor participation rate in 40 years. 40 years.
We're in year 8, all right? And median income is still not rising enough to give American workers, no matter how many jobs, it's how will they pay. So I don't want to get into that. That's something for you guys to do on the business end. But you can't deny that President Obama going into the climate precincts, and again, I'm sympathetic with that. I am an environmentalist. I want a cleaner planet. And allowing what's going on with ISIS and allowing what's going on at the southern border.
Well, I agree with you about ISIS,
stuff.
But ask your children, ask your teenagers about climate change. My 10-year-old came to me and said, "Dad, should I be afraid when all that climate change talk was happening, and I said she's never come to any other issue.
Because they're scaring the hell out of the kids. They're scaring them.
But are they? But isn't it a legitimate concern?
It's legitimate, but it isn't an urgent concern because there's nothing the United States can do if China and India continue to pollute the way they're polluting. We can try, and he should. But he doesn't. He's making this a central part of the presidency.
The essence of your presentation to me sounded like timing is everything in life. In Paris, he shouldn't have talked climate change the way he did because people were concerned about the 132 people who had just been slaughtered.
That's right.
So that's about timing. But that doesn't diminish in the big picture climate change or in a practical sense the appeal to the millennial voters. The millennial voters.
If you're going to politic it, then you lose me. It's a matter of priorities. First priority for me, getting American workers in a position where their salaries can go up by getting good jobs and letting the free marketplace run. All right? He's failed. Obama has failed with his income redistribution. Go ahead.
Two things. The more imminent threat than climate change or guns are terrorists, homegrown terrorists. Today alone, we have a terrorist cell discovered in California and in Texas. Your daughter or your son, your 10-year-old, is concerned about climate over being blown up by a fellow student at one of her high schools or future schools?
I'm so glad you said homegrown, Eric, because these are Americans that we are fearful of, rather than make immigrants the boogeyman.
You have a president that can't even call it a terror threat. He can't even call it Islamic terror or Islam.
I got to warn you, Geraldo, okay? 3 more segments down, you're going to hear a horrifying story about what's happening in Germany with the immigrants.
No, I totally get that. Turning that 1 million in without knowing who they were.
It has to be regulated.
Who is proposing that? I am not.
Well, the Open Border crew, which is most of the Democratic Party in the southern part of the United States, have been proposing it for 30 years.
Can I throw one thing in here? And the most egregious thing of this whole is not that President Obama wants to secure his legacy going forward, because when he's not President Obama, when he's former President Obama, he'll be taking a lot of money from the climate people and the anti-gun lobbies. That's fine. The most alarming thing is that the media is complacent in this. The things you're going to point out later in the show, the rapes that are going on in refugees areas like Germany, they want to do that here. And the media says, you know what, let's talk about President Obama's gun. There was a town hall last night on his gun laws.
That President Obama's tears were legitimate when he cried,
President
when
Obama
he spoke
cried.
of the Sandy Hook?
He legitimately cried. He had emotion, but he didn't have emotion for San Bernardino. He doesn't have emotion when kids are blowing themselves up, when they're shooting each other in Chicago.
All right, I got it. You.
Me?
He cries.
He cries.
And I said that night that was legitimate. He feels terrible for these children who are being slaughtered in Chicago, because he mentioned Chicago right before the tears flowed. You're sitting there and you're telling me that Bill O'Reilly, couldn't stop that murder in Chicago? Yes, I could. I put National Guard on in those neighborhoods, and those gangs would not peep. Okay? That's what I would do. He's known about this for 7 years. It's his neighborhood. What step has he taken to stop that murder in Chicago? I'll tell you what step. Nothing. Nothing. And neither is Rahm Emanuel. So yes, his tears were sincere, but his actions have not stopped one single crime in Chicago. You answer.
Murder is at record lows, as you know, across the country. Gun advocates.
We're talking Chicago.
Gun advocates. When you talk Chicago, what we need, I agree that much more has to be done. I am not in favor of gangs, nor am I in favor of murder in Chicago. So you put up the straw man in that regard. The president is not the chief policeman of the city of Chicago.
He can order the National Guard out in those neighborhoods.
The National Guard is irrelevant when it comes to street crime.
No, it's not a good stop and cold.
Why not just have stop and frisk in Chicago? Have the cops have stop and frisk.
I want to stop the murder of 9-year-olds, and I know how to do it.
And so do I.
And then the guard would do it, and he hasn't done anything.
But allowing people who are mentally ill from getting guns is not going to.
Last word.
And also the law. Here's the last word. 377 days. Whatever President Obama gets with his executive action and executive order, sign it off. It can be undone on January 20th.
Undo the background check.
It's not going to.
There's nothing new. There's nothing new.
Background checks are necessary. We got to register our cars. We should have to register our guns.
Thank God for that.
But it's not going to stop the problem. I want to stop the problem.